I'm Jimmy
I'm
James.
Carl Knapp.
Carl is a practicing attorney in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. We're longtime friends, and once a week we get together to talk about divorce, child support, custody, criminal law, and much more. So come hang out, because this is
Just lawing around.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Just Lawing Around. This week, we're going to be talking about custody and everything involving custody. Who gets custody? How do you apply for custody? How do you modify custody? What about contempt of custody? All sorts of different things we're going to be talking about this week. What's going on, Carl?
Hey, James, how's it going?
Not too bad. A little dreary out today, isn't it?
Yeah, we're recording this. It's kind of a dreary Sunday when we're recording this, but good day to podcast.
Oh, it's a perfect day to podcast. Just sit inside and talk about custody, right? Now,
Exactly.
So as we always talk about, family law is your most primary thing. So obviously you deal with custody a lot.
Yeah, I handle a lot of custody cases, and custody cases, they seem to never go away. They keep coming back, because people want to keep changing custody, or custody's not working. So yeah, custody goes on and on. So I end up seeing a lot of custody modifications, and I know we're going to touch on a lot of that stuff down the road. But yeah, it's a tough situation when you're dealing with kids and who's going to see them and what they're going to do.
Well, and so that's what you deal with a lot. Like, so what do you see the most when it comes to custody? Is the modifications, or is it the actual beginning process of getting custody?
Yeah, you start custody. You've got to you don't have to have a custody order, but it usually makes sense for people to have a custody order. So you start with the easy way to start. You file a custody complaint, and that gets filed in the county where the child resides. It's called the home state is the state where the kid resides, and then the county is the county. So you file, in our case, Montgomery County, you file your custody complaint asking for custody.
Okay, and you just submit that into a judge, and then what? You get, I'm assuming, we went over the whole child support thing, so I'm assuming it's similar to that, where you would have some kind of mediation to try and get an agreement before you actually go in front of a judge.
Yeah. Procedurally, the way it works in most counties around here, Montgomery County, Bucks County, Chester County, is after you file for custody, they have mandatory mediation and mandatory parenting seminars. So the parties are required to attend mediation. The court will appoint a mediator, which is usually a lawyer, but sometimes it's a counselor or a psychologist. And both parties have to go to a mediation session, just one, to try to see if they can get their custody worked out.
Okay.
It usually doesn't work. In fact, it almost never works.
Yeah, I'm sure there's times where it is, but yeah, I would imagine most people are going head to head and taking it in front of a judge as far as they can to get what they want. But before we go down that a little bit, I wanted to ask you, before anybody gets a custody order, but before one even exists, regardless of the age of the child, how does that work as far as custody goes? Is there an implied custody? Is there some kind of understanding? Is there already 50-50? If there's no custody order, where do they stand as far as custody rights?
If there's no custody order, biological parents have custody rights just because they're parents. So you don't need a custody order to say that you have rights to a child. So
and that goes for both parents.
That goes for both parents. Yeah, I have two kids. They're older now, but I don't have a custody order. Obviously, I'm not divorced or anything like that. But if my wife and I were to separate, I have the same rights to the children as she does. A lot of people think, women or the females have more rights than the men. That's not the law. Both parents have equal rights. So even if you don't have a custody order, you both have equal rights to the child. Now, the problem with that is I can go pick up my kid and take him wherever I want. I don't have to tell my wife. My wife then has the same ability that she can come back to my house and try to take the kids, or go to school and take the kids. So it becomes a little bit of a free-for-all if you don't have a custody order and you don't get along.
Right. So you're saying that neither parent can overstep the boundaries of custody if there is no custody order. They have free reign to do what they want. regardless of what the other parent's saying, and it can't be like kidnapping or contempt of court or anything of that nature.
Right. Both parents have the same exact rights. So you can't be found in contempt of court since there's no court order. You can't say, I mean, you can, people say, hey, you know, kids are staying with me, you're not going to see them. But that's not legally binding on anybody. If my wife says, hey, the kids are staying with me and I can't see them, there's nothing to stop me from going to school or go to daycare and picking them up if there's no custody order. So
Right.
you do both have those rights. It gets, as I said, it gets, if people start grabbing the kid and one goes to school and picks him up and the other goes to school 15 minutes earlier and picks him up, it gets ugly. And they're the kind of people that you should really file and get a custody order.
So without custody order, like without an actual court ordered custody order, like the daycares and the schools and everything, they have to respect the rights of the parents,
They do.
regardless
because
of their opinions. Like if one parent is against it and the other one wants to pick them up, they're going to be allowed to pick them up because there's no order saying they can't.
Correct. There's nothing to stop them from picking the kid up. Now, sometimes you get people that will lie to the daycare or lie to the school, and they'll go in and they'll say, hey, my husband's not allowed to pick up the kids, you know, for whatever reason, because the court said so. Or, you know, the only people that can pick up the kids are me and my mother, nobody else. Usually the school or the daycare will say, well, we need a copy of the order, the custody order or something. And if you don't have one, back to your question, both parties have the right to go and pick up the kid.
Right.
Now,
Because it's not the school's place to mediate that, and they don't want to get between that.
and schools and daycares, they hate those kind of things.
Oh, I'm sure they do. It's a headache.
From their standpoint, yeah, it's a headache. And if one party's going to come in and lie,
Could be a liability.
it becomes a mess. So they usually want to see a custody order. But I've had people give an old custody order, which I think is kind of sneaky, right? So it's like we had a
crafty.
custody order, 2 years ago. I give that to the daycare and go, oh look, the custody order says I have sole custody here.
Well, that brings up a good question. Does a custody order expire?
It does not expire. So somebody who's not, privy to the case, like a daycare doesn't know what order is the existing order. Like my existing order, I could get an order when my kids are 2 years old, and theoretically that order would stay in place until my kids are 18.
Right.
But or I could get that order and 6 months later it was changed, and 6 months after that it was changed again, and 6 months after that it was changed
then your
again.
wife could take that original order and try and use that. Okay, I see what you're saying.
You could do that. You can get in trouble. The judges wouldn't like that if they found out. Oh, they gave you
false documents or fraud or something.
It's fraud is what it is.
Right.
But the people that are dealing with the custody, like the daycare and stuff, they would have no clue if it was modified or not. And they're probably going to honor it unless the other party goes back and says, no, here's a newer order that says that it modified the previous order.
Okay, so if you're married and living together, you would agree that there's probably, it's a cooperative marriage, and there's probably no reason to get a custody order. But assuming that you're divorced, or maybe you weren't married, you're split up, you're not living together, would you recommend, even if you're getting along at that point, would you recommend there be a custody order put in place?
I usually tell my clients that you should have a custody order. Now, custody order, you can also, I'm using the term custody order. You can have a custody agreement, which is you and the other parent, you sit down, you write it out, and you can send it to the court, then the court will sign it and enter it as an order of court.
So then it becomes legally binding.
Then it becomes legally binding. I mean, if we sit down and just write it out on a piece of paper, it's an agreement, but it's not a court order.
Right. It's more like a civil agreement, I guess.
Yeah. So it's better to have it as a court order. And, you can make it very vague or you can make it very specific.
Right. Which I'm sure the people who are going head to head are going for the specifics just to be a hassle.
The people that are fighting, the people that can't agree on anything, you have to really spell out every single day and time, and it's got to be Friday at 4 p.m.
Right.
and
And this
till
holiday
Sunday.
and that holiday and days off of school and yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things we'll talk about a little bit, is well, what actually goes in a custody order, what kind of things are in there.
Right.
I mean, starting from the beginning, I guess there are types of
Well, I
custody.
was gonna say that like there's so you can go and try and file for just a regular custody. Look, I want to get a custody order put in place and have it laid out for me. But there's also I don't know what else there is, but I do also know there's emergency petitions for custody.
Yeah, you can file an emergency petition for custody if, and every judge defines what an emergency is differently. But if my wife told me, "Hey, I'm moving to Florida next week and I'm taking the kids," well, that's an emergency custody. I would immediately file something and try
And
to get a
stop
judge
that from happening.
to stop
Right.
her, to enter an order that says you cannot leave, or you can't leave the state with the children until we have a full hearing. Or you could have a scenario where maybe somebody
Like the
is,
safety.
yeah, safety. I mean, we had talked about PFAs before, but it could be, you could also file an emergency custody petition too and say, oh, somebody's, using drugs and they're falling asleep or they're unconscious or passing out when they have the kid. So you file an emergency custody and says, "Hey, judge, I don't want the other parent to see the kid until they get cleaned up, till they go to rehab, until the situation has changed." But that would be an emergency.
An emergency
Okay.
orders or I guess requests are or complaints you would probably say they're different from regular custody where when you go in and file for regular custody there's a process to it where the emergency custody is pretty rapid, right?
Yeah, the emergency is it's basically the same thing, um, but it just moves faster on the emergency.
Right.
And the
It's
emergency usually handles a specific situation. Like if two parents don't have a custody order and you say, "Hey, I'm filing an emergency custody order, judge, because I want you to spell out what days I have the kid and what days he has the kid." That's not really an emergency in the
right.
court's eyes.
Right.
And the emergency is usually just to cover like one little situation, like in my scenario, like, okay, neither party can leave the jurisdiction until there's a further hearing with the judge.
Right. Okay.
So they kind of just,
And that you can file emergency petitions even if you have a custody order already in place.
you can, yes. Usually that, again, it comes up with something that comes up suddenly. If you found out that, okay, I just found out that the mother of my child was put in rehab, and she's supposed to have the kids this weekend under the custody order. So I can file an emergency and say, "Hey, judge, I want you to enter an order that says I have the kids this weekend, and I continue to have full custody of the kids until,
So that
the other
situation
party."
changes. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. People file. I don't like emergency petitions. The judges don't like them, because the judges have to really drop everything to deal with them, and the judges are busy.
Right.
Uh, I see them sometimes with travel, where a party goes and they buy, say, plane tickets because they're going to take the kids away on vacation or something, and then a week before they leave, you get the other parent says, "Well, screw you, you're not taking the kids."
Right.
Then you got to go get an emergency petition so the judge can order, so you don't lose your airline tickets and you don't lose your reservations
I
and all
wouldn't
that.
really look at that as an emergency.
No,
But you're
see,
saying that
I
happens?
oh yeah, yeah. See, I would. I mean, to me, look, if you suppose you booked a Disneyland vacation and you got airline tickets and you dropped $3 grand on this trip, and then the other party says you're not taking the kids, I'm keeping them this weekend.
Yeah, but see, I look at emergency as like a safety problem, not necessarily like that. That's what I think of when I hear emergency. Like, I wouldn't waste the judge's time on that because at the end of the day, what if you just take them anyway? Like, and then what? They're
Yeah,
gonna file contempt, and you're gonna say the same story to the judge, and the judge is gonna be like, well, that's not really fair. What happened?
and that's a big part of custody. Like sometimes custody is like you just said, and is sometimes you just do what you have to do.
Right.
But that may be a scenario where, if some people like, if you can't get in the house or something, some people just lock the door and say, you're not getting the kids.
Yeah, but
So
I mean, all
what
right.
are you
So
gonna do?
in that scenario, if you have an actual piece of paper and custody order, is that enforceable by the police?
It is, but most police departments will not mess with custody.
They'll say it's a civil problem, take it to court.
Yeah, most cops don't like to get involved with it. They
I don't
sometimes
blame
will
them.
come. Yeah, they sometimes will come to the house and say, "Hey, look,
Mediate the tension.
he says he's supposed to have him this weekend. I'm reading this custody order. It looks like this is his weekend. Can you give him the kids?" Now, if the other party's just, no, screw him. It's not his weekend because we switched last weekend. That's what you see, right?
Right, right,
And then the cops are in the same position. They're like, well, I don't know whose weekend it is because it says alternating weekends.
right,
Well, they usually don't say every single date, right? That this is father's, this is mother's. They say father has every other weekend, Friday to Monday morning.
right.
But you don't, if I just read that, I don't know whose weekend it is just by reading that.
No, that makes sense. So
Yeah,
they
you see it a
so they
lot of
just
times.
try and mediate the tension, and they don't try and enforce it. They might put a little pressure, but they don't really go further than that.
Usually, and each department's a little different, but sometimes they will come out and say, "Hey, he says it's his weekend. Can you give him the kids?"
Right,
Eh, And a lot of departments will say, "Hey, call your lawyer or file something with the court."
right, right. They don't want
They
nothing to do
they
with
don't want to. They don't want to
it.
deal with it because they don't know what's going on, and they don't know. Oh, he told me I could have him this weekend. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Well, how the heck? They don't know.
All right. Well, so back to the other scenario where you have two parents that aren't living together. They're not married, or maybe they are married, but they're not living together, and they want to file for custody. You suggest if there's no custody order that they file for custody anyway, just to have that, that safety net. All right, so they want to do that. They go down to Montgomery County Courthouse or whatever courthouse they have to go to. And what do they expect there? Where do they go to actually file?
Yeah, you file with the Pathonetary's office, which is the civil division.
I was
But
going to
they
say
also
that, but I wasn't 100% sure it was pathonetary.
people love that word too, Pathonetary.
It's such a weird word.
Nobody knows. I had never heard of it, even through law school. I never heard of the word Pathonetary, but that's where you do. That's the civil filing. You go down. They have them. A lot of these counties have forms. It's fill in the blank. You fill in father's name is, mother's name is, the child lives at this place with these people, child's date of birth,
Right.
and I'm asking for custody. Now, when you ask for custody, there's a couple types of custody. There's legal custody. Legal custody is the right of a parent to make important decisions in a child's life, including education, medical treatment,
So,
religious.
but that doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, right?
It doesn't have to be. It usually is. Like you as a parent have the right to say where your kid's going to go to school.
Right.
So you have legal. Same thing we talked before. If you don't have a custody order, me as a parent, I can say I'm going to take my kid to the doctor. I'm going to go get my kid a vaccine, right? And
Right. Well, I guess more the way that I meant that question is, I don't know, father isn't around, mother's on drugs, grandparent has the child. Well, okay, so that's not the parent, but that is the guardian who has the
Yeah.
child most of the time. They could file for a legal custody, right?
Correct. Third, in certain circumstances, grandparents can. Sometimes you can even have a third party who is raising the children or child
Okay.
be get custodial rights. It's usually when they've been watching the kid, and I think we touched about this a little bit on one of our podcasts in the beginning, but yeah, in certain circumstances, a third party who's not even related could technically get custodial rights to a kid, but that's generally, like you said, the parents are usually out of the picture, or
Or incapable to some degree.
yeah, they're in prison, they're drug addicts, they're missing, they skipped town, they left the kids with grandma. Grandma can go in and file a petition for custody, and she'll get a court order giving her legal custody, which means, grandma can then enroll the kid in school
Right.
or get the kid, medical treatment. That's the legal custody. When you have two parents, that's generally shared, which means they both have. You almost never. It's very, very unusual for one parent to have what's called sole legal custody, which means they're the only one that can make decisions regarding the kid.
Yeah, I mean the courts are pretty lenient on that, or I guess not lenient. I don't know what the right word is, but the courts don't like to give sole custody if there's another parent wanting to be involved, right?
Yeah, it's almost, you almost never see it. It's very unusual. A lot of people come in and they sit down in my office and they go, "I want sole custody." And I say, "Well, why?" "Well, my husband, he got remarried, and his new wife, I don't like her, and she's, I don't like the way she treats my kids. I'm not saying abuse, but you're not going to get sole
Yeah,
custody."
I don't see that happening in that scenario.
It's I tell people it's very unusual. You'll see if one parent's in jail, okay, you'll see sole, or one parent's mentally ill or a drug addict, you can sometimes see
I
sole
mean, even
legal.
with the whole drug addict thing and addiction, like they still don't generally give sole custody away like that, do they?
They don't. I don't. I'm trying to think if I've ever had a case where somebody had sole legal or sole physical.
I mean, the fact that you even have to think about that says that it's not very common. And you've been
No,
practicing for how long?
yeah, just about 30 years. So
So in 30 years,
yeah.
you've only had a handful of cases that fit that scenario.
Yeah, and it's sometimes what you'll get is you'll have. I had a few cases where they'll give one parent the sole decision to make specific decisions. Like I had one where I represented mother, and father was kind of a strange guy, and he didn't believe that the kid had allergies, and he didn't believe that the kid had various conditions. He was a little nutty. But
It's on that holistic path, huh?
yeah. So when we went to court, I said to the judge, I know you're not going to give me sole legal on everything, but we at least want mother to have the sole decision making with regard to medical decisions, and we got that. So we got that. So it said, mother shall be the sole determiner of medical decisions regarding the child.
Okay.
So that way we didn't have,
But without medical, what does that leave to share soul with?
It could be, you could still have educational decisions. You could still have religious decisions. You could still have like after school activities becomes a big one. Like I'm going to put my kid in soccer. I'm going to sign my kid up for soccer.
Okay.
And then my wife says, "No, I don't want him to do soccer." Or football, football. "Oh, it's dangerous. I don't want him to get a concussion." Well, I want him to go to. You get arguments on legal custody quite a bit too, and those get tricky. I had a case that now with this COVID stuff, right? People fall on, "Hey, I want my kid vaccinated," and the other parent says, "I don't want my kid vaccinated." And
Right.
are you going to vaccinate a 6-year-old? Some parents say absolutely. Other people say no.
We get real political in this.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
going to steer clear of it, but we definitely
I'm
could get
not.
real political on this.
As I say, I'm not saying what side I fall on.
We're going to get censored right before we even get started.
But that is a legal custody issue. Now
For
the
sure,
problem
yeah.
is,
I mean, not
have
even
two.
COVID vaccines, just any vaccines could be
Sure.
an issue
Yeah,
for people.
Yeah, or I even make it not so political, right? As I said, back to my football analogy, right? A lot of kids get concussions and stuff playing football.
Yeah.
I could see a scenario where mother says, I don't want him playing football because it's dangerous. He's going to get a concussion. And dad says, well, I played football in high school and college and I want him to play.
Right.
That's a legal custody issue. And the problem becomes when you have two people and they disagree, what do you do?
Yeah.
I want him to play football and you don't. So I go and I sign him up for football. And mother goes and talks to the coach and says he ain't playing.
All right. So, well, what? Yeah, all right. That's a good question. So, if they have a shared custody and one parent is for it, the other parent isn't, one parent signs them up and the other one conflicts with it. I mean, what happens in that scenario?
Well, you either work it out,
Right.
which is right. Or most people they can't work it out. That's why they got divorced, or that's why they separated in the first place, right? Because they can't communicate.
Right.
Or you just do it. It's something like a vaccine, and I would never tell a client to just do it. But I have
Right.
had,
I mean, that's more of a personal decision for sure.
yeah, I've had strange things. A strange one. Where say the kid wants to get their ears pierced.
Right.
Okay. We have a 5-year-old daughter and my wife wants to get her ears pierced and I don't because I think she's too young and I don't think kids that young should have their ears pierced.
I'm sure that's a pretty common conflict.
Yeah. You get those.
And I can see both sides of that.
Yeah, you can see both sides. But, if my wife drops the kid off at my house on my weekend and she's got her ears pierced, what am I going to do?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess there's nothing you can do.
It's done.
So that brings up a really good point. And I'm kind of like reading between the lines of what you said, but when you have a custody order and it's shared, or even if it's not shared, like what if, it's just your time with the child? I mean, what rights do you have to do with that child? I mean, do you have those choices to, if I get her for a weekend, him or her for a weekend, right? Can I take that child to the beach for the weekend? Like, do I have to verify anything that I do with that child with the other parent during my time?
Normally, no.
Okay.
And that's physical custody, right? Legal custody, we were just talking about. That's a right to make decisions, where the kid's going to go to school, whether the kid's going to be raised Catholic or Protestant. That's legal custody. Physical custody is, yes.
And wait, I'm sorry. Physical custody is what you generally deal with.
You deal with both. Yeah, you fight more over physical custody. Physical custody is where the kid's gonna live.
Okay.
So, and we'll get. I'll touch back on your question, but yeah, the legal custody is who makes decisions regarding the kids. The physical is where's the kid live, right? Where does the kid stay?
Okay, so you can have a child, and I do want to circle back to that question, but you can have a child physically in one place, but have another person legally making those decisions for him?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. It's almost like a power of attorney over child.
Sure. Both, and legal, again, usually both parents. So, but if the parent if my child is with my wife for the weekend, I still have legal custody over that child, but so does my wife.
Okay.
So if my wife says, I'm going to take her to the doctor and get her vaccinated, or I'm going to go take her to the mall and get her ears pierced, my wife has the right to do that. I have the right to say no.
Right.
But if my wife goes and does it, gets back to
She's not in any legal issue.
She hasn't violated the order. You're supposed to talk about these things.
Well, sure. The right thing to do.
You're supposed to discuss them, but people discuss this stuff all the time, and it comes down to, well, I say yes and he says no.
Well, and I'm sure if you have a custody order, most times it's because you have a problem with those communications.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. You can't communicate anyway. So you get a lot of these things. Now, could I file contempt? I guess I could file contempt and say, hey, my wife didn't ask me about getting the ears pierced, or she asked me, but I said no. Is a judge going to find her in contempt? Probably not on something like that. I've had judges yell at my clients because they do they enrolled the kid in private school or something.
Right. I mean, well, that's a big educational change.
That's a big educational
and financial
change. right, and the judge will say, "Well, you should have told him, or you should have talked to him." Well, I talked to him, but he said no. The safest way, something big like that, I would say to my clients, we'll have to file a petition with the court and let the judge decide.
Right.
That's really the tiebreaker, but you can't have a tiebreaker every single day. Every time
Yeah.
you disagree with your significant other, or the other parent, you
You
can't
can't be
file a
filing
petition.
contempt. He's going to
Uh,
get annoyed.
yeah, I mean, plus it'll cost you $1 million if you hire a lawyer.
I vaguely remember through one of our previous conversations, and this is going a while back, that you want to like write down and mark down these issues and then file when you have a bunch of them added up, like
Yeah,
contempts.
it makes sense. Yeah, contempts, you want to add them up. Contempts, and that usually comes in. You see that more with the physical custody. Oh, I was supposed to get the kid this weekend, and my ex-wife didn't give me the kid.
Right.
So you missed a weekend with the kid. I usually wouldn't file over something like that, but if it happens 2 or 3 times, yeah, you got to file.
Right. Okay. So if there becomes a pattern or multiple times, but don't waste your time on like one small thing.
It depends on the severity, but I try to talk parents out of it because you're going to have ongoing problems. So you might as well try to address a bunch of them at the same
Right.
time.
So, all right. So does that also apply to like, I guess like opinions? Like if I'm sending my child to the other parent and I don't like the friends the other parent has, there's nothing I can do about that, correct? Like it's the other parent's time. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
That's
there's
assuming that
not-
the child's in safe as long as they're
Right.
safe.
Right. There's not a lot you can do. So when it's your custodial time, and that's if it's so you have a weekend. And to get back to your question, if I have my child for this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I say, oh, I'm going to take the kid down to the beach for the weekend. I'm going to go to Ocean City or whatever and hang out for the weekend.
Right.
I'm allowed to do that.
And
And
that's not considered a vacation that you need to approve or anything
no,
because it's not
no,
interfering with the other person's time.
correct. It's my time. I can pretty much do whatever I want with the child on my time.
Could I fly across the country?
If you can do it in a weekend,
Okay. So
if you can do it, look, if you say, look, I'm going to get on a plane Friday, I get the kid after school Friday, and we're going to fly to Florida, a 2-hour flight, and we're going to come back Sunday, and as long as I get the kid back Sunday at 7 p.m. when I'm supposed to have him back, you're allowed to do that.
okay.
There's no problem with that.
No, that's interesting to me. Okay. That's
Yeah.
good. I like that though.
And that's I know we try to cover general things, but that's if there's nothing in the court order that says otherwise.
Right. I mean, that's assuming that for
So,
sure.
Yeah.
Because custody orders, I mean, they can get down to every fine detail.
Yeah, when you get a custody order or custody agreement, so the way they work is you have legal custody. It defines who has legal custody. Then it defines physical custody, and that's okay. Mom has the kids these days. Dad has the kids these days.
Right.
And then you can have shared custody. Shared generally means 50-50, where you have equal amount of overnights. Or you can have what's called primary custody. If you have primary custody, that means the kids stay with you more than 50% of the time.
Okay.
And then if one parent has primary custody, then that means by definition the other party has partial custody, which that means they have the children less than 50%.
But unless stated otherwise, primary and partial custody does not change your legal decision-making rights on medical, schooling, those things. Like you still retain all of that unless stated otherwise.
Yeah, almost everybody shares legal custody.
Okay.
So if you have 2 weekends with the kids each month, which could be, Friday overnight and Saturday, but that's 4 nights a month you have. So you have partial custody of the kids because you have way less than 50%.
Right.
But you still have shared legal. So it doesn't matter if you have 50-50 with the kids or you have one night over one night a month with the kids, you still usually share legal. So it doesn't go hand in hand, physical and legal custody.
Okay, so far we have legal, then we have physical shared 50-50, physical primary custody more than 50% of the time, physical partial custody less than 50% of the time. What else is there? Is there any other ones?
You could have sole custody, which means I have the kid 100% of the time. Again, that's like very, very rare.
Right.
Although I've seen it where one parent is missing or one parent's in jail or something, then obviously they can't have custody of the kids. So mother or father has sole custody. And then you can have what's called supervised. It's really not supervised custody. I mean, to be hyper technical, it's called supervised visitation, because visitation means you visit with the child, but you don't have the right to take the child by yourself.
Right.
So supervised is my mother has to be present when I'm with the kids, or I have to go visit with the kids at some place and somebody watches me. And that's usually if you're a dangerous person or, you're
A sex offender or something?
Yeah, it could be a sex offender.
Which is interesting that even sex offenders still retain rights to their kids.
They do. They do. And although you have limited rights, it's usually you're going to see supervised under that scenario. In other words, I get to visit with my kid 2 hours on Sunday and somebody's got to be there watching me.
Right.
To protect the kids.
But nevertheless, they still have the right to see their kids, which shows you that it takes a lot for a court to say you cannot see your kid.
It does. They put safeguards in place. So, okay, yeah, well, the kid's not going to get molested if we got somebody sitting there watching them.
Right.
So, but you don't get a lot of time. But yeah, you're still most likely going to end up seeing your kids and have some custodial time with your kids.
I think it's often misunderstood that courts favor the moms, because I think they do a really good job staying pretty neutral.
They do. It used to be years ago, kind of the mother was favored, especially with young children. There was a doctrine, nurturing party doctrine, which meant, that younger kids were better off with mothers versus fathers. That has all changed. There is no presumption that mothers should have more time than father or father should have more time than mother.
Right.
And I see it, right? In my practice, I have dads who have more time than moms do. It's not uncommon. Most cases, really.
Yeah, it's whatever fits the parents.
Yeah, whoever's, I don't say whoever's better, but things work out, maybe based on work schedules. It may be the mother has a problem, a drug problem or an alcohol problem, or just mother works weird hours, right? Maybe mother works third shift. So there could be scenarios where the father has more time than the mother, and it's not uncommon. There is no presumption that mom should have primary physical custody.
Okay, and one other random question: is there any legal writing or provisions for abandonment? Is there any period of time or anything like that where it just becomes an abandonment? But maybe if one parent isn't around for a period of time or something like that.
There's no set period of time. It's not 6 months or a year.
Right.
If one party is missing, I guess that's what you mean by abandonment, that they're not around.
Right.
That the party that is around should go and file a petition or a complaint for custody or a petition to modify and say, hey, he's not here. He hasn't reached out to the child in 6 months or a year, or I would even do it probably if it was shorter, maybe 3 months or something like that.
Right.
But, what you're really looking for is to change the order to say that the other party doesn't see the kid anymore.
Right.
Now if they show back up, they can file a modify and say, hey, I'm back.
Right. Right? And they have the rights right back because they're there.
Correct. And one of the things, custody can always be modified.
Would prison
Oh,
time be considered abandonment, or I guess that disappearance,
yeah, I think it would be.
where
Yeah,
the other parent may be able to get sole custody based on that?
yeah, I think they would have sole custody until now. When that party got released, that party could come, get out of prison and say, "I want to see the children,"
Right, and change that. Okay.
and change it now, depending on what they were in prison for. You might have restrictions in the order, and they might see them limited time,
Right.
but they can come back and ask
But sole
for
custody isn't necessarily a set in stone thing. That can be changed.
it can, yeah, that could be changed too, like anything else. Suppose somebody has a bad drug problem, and if the kids are young, 2, 3, 4 years old or whatever, and the person's a heroin addict and they're living on the streets, well, okay, the other parent's probably going to get sole legal custody. But if that person then goes into rehab and cleans themselves up and gets off the drugs and gets a job and gets a place to live, they can come back and apply for custodial rights.
Okay.
So, yeah, like you said, it can always be changed. Same thing, sole custody. Supervised can be changed too, depending on, why you're being supervised.
Right. I mean, as his time and circumstances changes, then I'm sure the custody orders can be modified to accommodate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because people change. I mean, you may, like some people go through a divorce and maybe, they start drinking too much or they get like super depressed, right? And they're just really in a bad spot. So they
Right.
really can't see the kids or they're really not able to see the kids. But then, time passes, they get treatment, they get on meds, whatever, and now they can. So you come back, you file a modification, and you try to change the custodial situation.
All right. Well, I kind of feel like I took you a little bit off course in the beginning there for the last 42 minutes now.
Yeah,
But
you always do.
I know. But that's what these are for, right? Like,
that's how we got started on this because this is what we do. We talk.
We do this without recording. That's why we decided to start recording them.
Exactly. We talk about these things and we get way off course. But
well, I think it's important to get back to the procedure and what to expect. So, I mean, you said you go into prothonotary. You file a basic, fill in the blanks document on what you're looking for and why. And then it gets sent off to a judge and you get sent to, you said a mediation and a seminar. Is that what you said?
Yeah. You have to do mediation. There's a parenting seminar in each county. You have to do that. I think it used to be online. I think they just went back to in person. It's like 2 hours or something. And then, but that's just required by the court. And then
Both parties have to do that.
Both parties have to do it,
and that costs.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's not the mediation costs too. You split the cost of the mediator. I think I forget $200 it is. So you each pay $100 for the mediator. It might be more than that now. And then
is there a cost to file the custody?
Yeah, there's a cost to file. That's about $300 to file a new custody action.
So we're looking at like $500 already.
Yeah, it gets expensive, and then after the mediation, then they will schedule what's called a custody conciliation, which is it's kind of like a mediation, but it's run by the court. There's a custody conciliator who's a lawyer. And you go in front of them, and it's pretty informal. And they talk to you. Okay, where do you live, Dad? Where do you live, Mom? Okay, what do you do for a living? When do you work? Where do the kids go to school? They get all the background, and then they try to basically come up with a custody agreement.
Okay.
So it's very informal. You're not in front of a judge. You can take lawyers, but they really try to talk to the parties at that point and try to get a custody order in place. And they do a pretty good job. I would say probably more than half, maybe 75% of my cases get resolved at that level.
Oh, that's good. I mean, that's good for the judges. I mean, but that's good for people too. If you can avoid that hassle and headache of fighting it out in court.
Yeah, it's pretty, as I said, it's not really super contentious. They try to focus on the agreement and okay, let's what time do you think would be good with you? What time would be good with you? And they will enter if everybody agrees. They enter an order and you're done. They send it to a judge. A judge signs it. If you don't agree, they usually enter a temporary order, which is good until the judge changes it.
Okay.
So that way, at least you don't have people in the interim while you're waiting for a hearing in front of a judge, which could be a couple months. You don't have people grabbing the kids and that kind of stuff.
Right. So they put some structure in there.
Yeah. So that's the custody conciliation. If you don't get an agreement, at that point, it's not resolved. It goes to the judge. They write a report and they send it to the judge. The judge reads the report. They usually make a recommendation that says, okay, I think, mom should have primary and dad should have every other weekend and Wednesday overnight, something like that.
Just out of curiosity, do you think the judges actually like read every word of these reports?
The judges, these reports, they do. I think they do because it gives them a pretty good background. They're not like super long. They're maybe 2 pages or something.
Yeah, but how many of them are they getting a day?
Yeah, they get a fair amount. I think generally when they read them is when the parties are scheduled for their conference.
Okay, so they brief themselves on the case.
Yeah,
okay.
So they brief it and they look at it and they go, okay, well, I read the conciliation, so I know, I know all the background, and I see, Dad, you want 50-50, but the conciliator only said you should really have any other weekend. What,
But so the conciliator recommendations are important. Like they actually value those.
Yeah, they carry a lot of weight. They
Okay.
actually do carry a lot of weight. Now, the judge can do whatever they want, but they do kind of value the opinion of the custody conciliator.
Okay.
So you really want to kind of plead your case. As I said, it's not like a courtroom. You're kind of in a little office. They've been doing on Zoom since the pandemic. But you want to get your points out there and say, hey, this is why I think I should have this time with the kids.
Right. Okay. Now, just briefly, like looking at our little notes that we had before this, you put in there that the hearing judge must consider 15 factors. And I've been staring at that, very curious of what those 15 factors are.
That's if you actually get to a hearing. So if you don't get the thing resolved in front of the custody conciliator, you'll have a conference usually in front of a judge, and then you'll have a hearing. And a hearing is like a real trial.
Okay.
So you both, mom and dad will both testify. They will, sometimes you have other people testify that may spend time with the kids, grandparents or neighbors. And then the judge has the right to interview the kids. They usually will talk to the kids, depending on how old the kids are, they will talk to them.
Okay.
And then they will enter a decision. Now, their decision is just based on, these 15 factors, and they're set forth in the custody statute. And I'm not going to read them all, but I'll read a couple of them. Which party?
Just give me an idea.
Yeah, like some of them a lot of them kind of overlap. But which party is more likely to encourage and permit frequent and continuing contact between child and another party? So that's kind of like who's the accommodating parent, right? Like,
okay.
Are you trying to keep your kids from the other parent? Or are you being like, oh, okay, you can take them this weekend? So they look at that. They look at the parenting duties performed by each parent. So like who feeds the kid, who takes the kids to the doctor visits, to the dentist visits.
Right. Okay.
They look at the availability of extended families. So, does the kid have, grandparents? Are they in the area? Nieces and nephews, aunts and uncles. They look at sibling relationships, which is they generally keep kids together. So if you have 2 or 3 kids, it's very unusual that they would split them. Which party is more likely to attend daily physical, emotional, developmental, educational, and special needs of the child? So like which parent's going to help the kid with their homework after school, proximity of the residences, so how close the parties live, daycare, availability of daycare. They look at history of drug and alcohol abuse, mental health of the parties. And then they do look at the preference of the child. People always ask me that. That's one of the factors. As I said, it's one of 15. So people always say, "Well, my son says he doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to go to dad's house."
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that he's not
Yeah.
going to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I always tell people that's one of 15 of the custody factors,
Right.
and it depends on the age of the child. It depends on the reasoning why they say they don't want to go. Usually, you see older kids. Judges will listen to older kids. I usually say 15, 13, 14, 15, usually 15, 16, 17, depending on, you can have a 17-year-old kid that's very immature, and you can have a 13-year-old kid that's very mature.
Right.
So it kind of depends
So it's
on,
case by case.
yeah, yeah. So, but there is no, it's not like, well, little Johnny says he doesn't want to go, so he doesn't have to go.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And people always feel like, well, they said they don't want to, so they don't have to. No, it's one factor, and it may sway the judge a little bit, like less time with one party, but a 15-year-old doesn't make the decision as to
Right.
where they're gonna stay.
It's just a consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. So the factors, as I said, if you're in a custody situation, you should look at the factors. They're in if you Google, factors to consider in a custody case, you'll get them. So there's a lot of them overlap. It really kind of boils down to what's best for the kids, best
Right.
interest is really, but it tells you should look at these factors, and the judge will enter an order saying, okay, I've heard the testimony, I've reviewed the factors, and I'm going to enter an order. The parties are going to share legal custody. Mother's going to have primary physical. Dad's going to have partial custody every other weekend and every Wednesday from blah, blah, blah. They usually include other things such as vacations. Holidays are always in a custody schedule. And then they can have other restrictions. You were talking about, well, if you want to take your kid, to Florida for the weekend.
Right.
A lot of custody orders will say parent can't leave the state without notifying the other party.
Okay.
Or can't leave the country. Now, if that's in your custody order, then you can't fly to Florida on your weekend.
Right.
But most custody orders will have something in there where you just have to give notice. You can still do it, but you have to tell the other party, hey, I'm going to Florida and we're going to be staying, at the Marriott in Orlando. So you have to tell them where the kid is.
But you can still do it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then vacations, they put them in there. It's usually 2 weeks if people are wondering.
Right. Okay. And then earlier we talked about how either your custody order, one of two things can happen. It can either change or it can expire. So it expires at 18, or it can get changed, if you guys modify it. I guess a question that I have is if you have maybe a child with special needs or autism or something, does that custody order potentially exceed 18, or would that become something different?
That would become something different. I mean, I guess you could petition for what's called a guardianship, because that person then becomes an adult.
Okay.
Once they turn 18, child custody, they define a child as somebody under the age of 18. That's
right.
Which it's not rocket science, but that's how they define them.
Right.
But yeah, if you have somebody with special needs, you might need, a guardianship, which is a totally different animal, but it kind of does the same thing.
So like adult custody.
Yeah, correct. Because some people see it, and we'll probably do an episode on one of these. If a grandparent or something, when they can no longer take care of themselves, maybe they have Alzheimer's or dementia or something,
right?
And they can't take care of themselves, they can't make decisions for themselves, then you can, file for a guardianship. But yeah, we're dealing here. That's after somebody turns 18.
Okay. All right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess as we're starting to wrap things up a little bit here. Is there anything else that we haven't gone over that you would like to add? Although I do believe we could probably do a part 2, 3, and 4 of custody.
So if people want us to go more into depth on one of these podcasts, we can get into specifically how a custody order is written, what kind of things you put in there, what a typical holiday schedule looks like, what a vacation schedule looks like, how you would do 50-50 if you want to do 50-50. So if people want to learn more about that, they could just shoot us an email and ask, and we could probably do a whole podcast on that. We can also talk about, if somebody violates, and I'll just touch on it, if you violate a custody order, the other party has to file what's called a petition for contempt. And contempt just means that you have willfully violated a court order.
Okay.
And that becomes, you can have them in custody, you can have them in equitable distribution, but in essence, you're saying, hey, I was supposed to get the kid this weekend. I didn't get the kid this weekend. My wife has violated the custody order. Therefore, I want either makeup time, or I want, her to be fined, or I want her to pay my attorney's fees. But if somebody's not complying with a custody order, that's how you get them to comply, is you file petition for contempt, and then it goes in front of a hearing in front of a judge, and you got to prove that they willfully violated. But
not to drag it out too much further, but what kind of penalties are there for contempts?
Contempts in a custody scenario, it's mostly makeup time. So if you miss 3 or 4 weekends with the child, the judge can say, okay, you get the next 3 weekends in a row, right, to make up for the time you miss. And it can also be something to punish the other side, like attorney's fees. So if I have to file on behalf of my client, I can say to the judge, hey, judge, make the other side pay my attorney's fees. Make them pay, whatever it is, $1,500.
Right.
It doesn't happen that much, but if you really ignore court orders, the judges can get pissed off, and they can say, you know what, you violate my order, so I'm going to make you pay the other side's attorney's fees. That kind of hurts people more than the makeup time usually.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, wow, you know what I mean? I got to pay his lawyer $1,500, and I had to pay my lawyer $1,500 to come in here.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, it can get pricey. So you want to comply with the order as best you can. If there's really something, if you have a good faith reason for violating it, you're probably not going to be found in contempt.
Right. Right.
If you had an emergency and you're like, oh, my car broke down, so I couldn't meet you halfway to exchange the kids. So
a legitimate explanation.
Right.
Sure.
You're not going to get in trouble for that kind of stuff.
Right. It's malicious is what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's intentional. Right. It's willful, as they call it, which means, you intentionally, you knew what you were supposed to do and you said, screw it, I'm not doing it.
Right.
That's really what contempt is. So yeah, that's kind of, I just want to touch on that. If people don't file a custody order, that's what you have to do.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, I do hope that we open this door again, which I'm sure we will. And I'd love to get people involved in these situations on here that we could have conversations with and go over their experience. But if you guys are enjoying this, be sure to hit like, definitely share, subscribe, comment. We put the email in our description. So if you guys have any questions or concerns, you can email us. If you want to contact Carl himself and have a consultation with him and you're in the area, his information is at the end of the podcast. Feel free to reach out to him, and he'll get you set up with an appointment and a consultation to go over your case personally. And with that being said, I guess we'll see you guys on the next podcast.
The information contained in this podcast is provided for general information purposes only. It is not intended as legal advice or advice for a specific case or legal matter. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as an agreement for legal representation. This podcast and parties do not represent you in your particular matter unless there's an express written representation agreement between you and this firm. If you're interested in obtaining legal services, head over to cnaplaw.com or call 215-268-6333 and schedule an appointment today. That's cnaplaw.com, 215-268-6333. For more high-quality music like this, head over to bensounds.com.